Ole Miss has made a terrific move that will continue to make the best wide receiver room in college football even better. We'll explain what that means. Also, Ole Miss baseball is showing signs of life during a Jekyll and Hyde weekend this weekend. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, I'm Stephen Willis, a former staff member at Ole Miss and a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports. Thank you very much for joining us. Today on the show, we talk about Ole Miss hiring Corey Dennis from Ohio State to be an analyst and why that move has a real shot to make that wide receiver room even better. Mantrez Walker, the top 2025 linebacker, is visiting Ole Miss for the second time in 6 weeks, and Ole Miss basketball is currently on life support while Ole Miss baseball is showing signs of life. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the everydayers who make the show what it is. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Corey Dennis was hired by Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss football as an analyst. And this is actually a fairly big move. And it's not the big move of bringing in an Ohio State quarterback coach and you bring it in for some sort of a coordinator or anything like that. This on the field is not going to accomplish that much. But what this does do is brings in somebody who is an excellent recruiter when you're trying to replace Shug Falk on your staff, an excellent analyst who has worked in this Ohio State system over the last 5 to almost 10 years and has learned how to scheme the wide receiver position open to where an assembly line of wide receivers were developed at Ohio State University. From, all the way back to, Michael Thomas, all the way to last year with Marvin Harrison Jr., Ohio State's wide receiver units have consistently been amongst the best in college football. Now, Corey Dennis was quarterback coach at Ohio State. Why? Everybody's like, what are you talking about? He was the quarterback coach. He was an intern. He was all of this. He worked for himself from the ground up all the way to quarterback coach at Ohio State. He is Urban Meyer's son-in-law, by the way, just so everybody knows about that. But him sitting those meetings, ingesting it, figuring out how the offense is run during that time when Ohio State's offense, especially throwing the ball to their wide receivers, was pretty electric, honestly. He is going to make it to where Juice Wells, where Tre Harris, Aiden Williams, Deion Smith, those guys that are expected to perform so much, he is going to bring some additional schemes into the system that Lane Kiffin has. And one thing that Lane Kiffin is really good at and really honestly known for is being able to incorporate different aspects into his basic general consensus of an offense. This Ohio State of getting wide receivers open and being able to scheme stuff to where the outside wide receivers are a dominant feature of the game. Mix that with his relationship with Charlie Weiss, who on the inside of the field is where the dominance is happening. You see what I mean? You've got outside, you've got inside, you've got a lot of different schemes you can run. The running game is probably not going to be at the level utilized it was. Now, don't get me wrong, okay? The running game for this Ole Miss offense is always going to probably be 55%, 57% at the absolute lowest. So whenever I talk about an offensive change, an offensive scheme change, it's still going to be essentially a run-first offense. That's just the way this works. Anytime you have an RPO system, it works that way. It's going to end up being a little bit over 55, 60% pass, somewhere in, or 60% run in that area. But when you look at what it was 2 years ago in 2022, when Ole Miss ran the ball like 72% of the time, when you look at where this offense was a year ago, where Ole Miss ran the ball like 63 to 64% of the time, this is going to seem like a little bit of a change schematically in this offense. And that is because this wide receiver room has a chance to be special. It has a chance to be unlike any other wide receiver room that wide receiver U has had. We talked to DeMarcus Lodge on this show a couple of days ago about the skills that these wide receivers have. He talked about what AJ and DK and how special they were, and Elijah Moore being a freshman in that room and what that looked like and what they did and the extra work. They were prepared to come in and get everything done that needed to be done. He's talking about this wide receiver group doing the same thing. You have the work ethic there. You have the idea of how to use them. Now you have somebody that can bring in some more ideas and schemes and figure out ways to concept them open, especially when they're getting keyed on. I think that's the important part that people need to realize in this hire. Tre Harris is going to get double teamed. It is. When you look at what's going to happen to Tre Harris in 2024, it's not going to be any differently done than what happened to Marvin Harrison Jr. in 2024. What did Ohio State do to try and scheme for that? How was Marvin Harrison Jr. still an effective player? When you move players around, how can you make them more effective? Tre Harris on Ole Miss's offense has played the right side, the left side, and the slot already. Extremely versatile player. You're going to have Deion Smith. You're going to have Juice Wells. You're going to have Aiden Williams. You're going to have a pretty healthy wide receiver room. How do you get the most out of them? You do that by bringing in different concepts and ideas. And one of those would be the Corey Dennis idea where, he sat in that Ryan Day offense when C.J. Stroud was calling the shots. The Dwayne Haskins, those guys that were putting up such big numbers, he was in that room. He was there when all that schematically was happening. If you can bring some of those concepts into your room, into your game plan, you have a chance to make Tre Harris even more effective of a player. You have a chance to figure out how to schematically use Juice Wells in a way that helps Tre Harris out as well as helping Juice Wells out. That's why this Corey Dennis hire is important. It's not because he was a quarterback coach necessarily at Ohio State. I don't necessarily care about that. I care about how schematically he has seen with what teams have done to Ohio State's wide receivers over the years. How do they schematically work to get those receivers open? That's what I care about. And that is what makes this a home run hire as an analyst. His recruiting prowess, all the backroom guys do recruiting stuff. The Kelvin Bolding, I'm sure all of that's going to be fantastic and work extremely well. The on the field stuff, don't necessarily care about that. I care about schematically working to make Tre Harris better, make Juice Wells better, make Deion Smith better, make Marquise Willis better. That is what I care about. And I think that Corey Dennis can absolutely get that done. It's a situation where he was the quarterback coach at Ohio State. Okay. If you just look at what's going on, Ole Miss adds him to the staff. He was at Ohio State, and after this season, he was let go. Head coach Ryan Day made the decision not to retain Dennis as an assistant after he completed his 4th season as quarterbacks coach. From there, Dennis seemed to have found a new home at Utah as an analyst, but was recently announced that he would soon be heading to the SEC and working as an analyst at Ole Miss. Dennis had a memorable 17-day run with Cal Whittingham and the Utes, but he's once again moving on to greener pastures with Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. Dennis was at Ohio State the past 9 seasons, getting his start as an intern under his father-in-law, Urban Meyer, and worked his way up from intern to grad assistant, quality control coach, and finally quarterbacks coach. You can see that he has a lot of off-the-field experience as well. It's also very telling, he says in this one, that of the 3 Ohio State coaches that were looking for work, Dennis is the only one that has found a new home, and it's a very, very clear demotion. And that's because the skill set that what Ole Miss needs in their football program with their wide receiver room, it gives them the benefit to take a chance on people like this. If you look at Corey Dennis, he was rated as like one of the 30 coaches under 30 and all of that. And this has a chance to be a very good fit for Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin, when he hires coaches and hires analysts, he seems to always just repeatedly, it works out. There hasn't been a situation where they've hired coaches where it really hasn't worked out. And that's a testament to Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss football. Ole Miss football in the wide receiver room has a chance to be so electric, so good this season. Corey Dennis is going to help with that. George McIntyre, Corey Dennis, they're going to take that wide receiver room to the next level and to a level that Ole Miss fans probably have not seen in several years. Pretty cool indeed. Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen of the day. We're just getting started. Mantrez Walker is due back in Oxford this March for the second time in as many months. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, same game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every single league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Now, it isn't just coaching news that happened over the weekend as well. Mantrez Walker has announced that he will be visiting Ole Miss, making his second trip in about 6 weeks on March 16th. This linebacker out of, I think, Buford, Georgia, maybe? Somewhere in Georgia, a high school. I forget the high school real quick, and I apologize for that. He is a upper tier linebacker. He set a top 5. Ole Miss made that list as well. And maybe he was at Grayson. Maybe that's where he is. But when you look at this linebacker player, he has a chance to be very consistent, very ready to go. He seems like he is a player that Ole Miss fans should keep an eye on over the next couple of, weeks, months, as this recruitment gets built up. Because this player, he's an electric linebacker, period. There's not many that are better in this whole recruiting class to me. And he has a chance to be really, really good. And we talked to Brian Smith, let's see, was it a week ago, 2 weeks ago? And he talked about, hey, this dead period is about to end. March 3rd, this dead period is about to end. And the savvy recruiting follower, the person that knows what they're looking for in recruiting, when all of this information comes out of certain players, top 5 and top 8 and top 16s or whatever start coming out, the savvy recruiting fans, the savvy recruiting experts, they're following the visits. This is the expression, follow the visits, that's starting right now. And Mantrez Walker is going to visit Ole Miss for the second time in 6 weeks. This is a Georgia linebacker. This isn't like he's coming over from South Panola. He is actually going from Georgia to Mississippi to Ole Miss for the second time in 6 weeks. That means something. Now, it doesn't mean that Ole Miss is going to get him, okay? It doesn't mean that. It means that Ole Miss is in good a spot as they can be as it comes to February of 2024 on this player's recruitment. They're in good shape. Ole Miss can continue to put their best foot forward and be everything that they want to be. This player has put out a top 5. He has an official visit set up for Stanford. Good for him. Let's see, I think that's in June or July, sometime around that. But we'll see exactly how this goes. Man, I interviewed Chris Childers over the weekend, and we just started talking about, how do you fix college sports and all of that and what is going on. And we started talking about how Cal and Stanford on June 30th, they're moving to the EAC. They're going to be an ACC school. So a couple of schools that are on essentially San Francisco Bay, right, are going to be in the Atlantic Coast Conference. You've got SMU that is joining that conference that is completely paying their own freight for like 8 years. Texas and Oklahoma coming into the SEC. The Big Ten, or whatever you want to call it, adding UCLA, Washington, and Oregon. And Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado are going to the Big 12. Schools that got left out in this round of conference realignment, Washington State and Oregon State, as predicted. And I was talking to him, and he was talking to me, and he said to me that whenever this actually happens at the end of June, and that all this movement happens over, I don't know how I'm going to take it, because everything is going to look so much differently than it does right now. But anyway, Mantrez Walker coming into Ole Miss's campus on March 16th. Really good linebacker. Pay attention to this name. Now, before we go to break, Ole Miss basketball is currently on a little bit of life support. Ole Miss lost to South Carolina by over 10 points over the weekend. It was a game that Ole Miss absolutely they had to win. And the reason I say they had to win is they needed to finish out the season 4-1 to be clearly in the NCAA basketball tournament. Now, there's still a path. They still have a path to get there. So don't let anybody tell you that they don't have a path. But the path that was really realistic and really cut and dry that you could point at, to where you beat South Carolina, you lose the game to Alabama, you figure out a way to win against Georgia, A&M, and Missouri, that's changed at this point. The loss to South Carolina, and Chris Beard said his team is mentally and physically just beaten down at the moment. And that comes from a little bit of them just having to wear down a little bit. They only played 7, 8, 9 players in a game this season. So as over the course of the season, they did wear down a little bit. And you can see on the court, they've worn down. But I don't know if that tells the entire story. And I don't think people need to underestimate this. When we talk about Ole Miss fans being disappointed in not making the NCAA tournament, that doesn't mean this basketball team has underperformed at all. This basketball team has overperformed. The fact that we were even talking about the NCAA tournament is a credit to Chris Beard and this Ole Miss basketball program in year one. So don't overhear anything. I know that there's some people and there's some but type fans and all of that. Don't bear down with those people and fall down to their level, okay? The reality of this is Ole Miss basketball won 3 SEC games a year ago. I think they won a total of 9 games a year ago with a loss to North Alabama, okay? The team was objectively a dumpster fire. It just was. Chris Beard comes in and immediately has flipped their record. They haven't even lost 9 games yet. We are almost in March, and they have not lost 9 games yet. They only won 9 games a year ago, period. So sit back, enjoy with this basketball program, be disappointed in them not making the NCAA tournament, but understand that being disappointed in not making the NCAA tournament is not an indictment on this coach, this basketball team at all, period. This team has been legitimately good for most of the season compared to where they were last year. Last year, they weren't competitive in any games. They got beat by North Alabama a year ago. This year, they've only lost to 2 teams that didn't have a number besides their name. This basketball team has gotten markedly better in 1 year under Chris Beard, and it's only going to get better from here. Now, in this age of the transfer portal and all of that stuff, I do not know exactly what it's going to look like, but I'm going to enjoy the ride. I am going to have fun with what's going on in this program. Whether or not Ole Miss's men's basketball team makes it to the NCAA tournament, this has been a successful season for Chris Beard because of where he had to come from. That's all I'm saying. And we'll be able to look at Ole Miss basketball with a smile on our face and get ready for the NIT if that's where Ole Miss ends up, and also for the 2024-2025 season. Pretty cool stuff. I think that Chris Beard should be commended for his first year in Oxford, Mississippi. Still more to come on Locked On Ole Miss, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Ole Miss baseball may be getting right after a complete disaster start. Thanks for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen of the day, and shout out to the everydayers. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every single league. For your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 stream channel. Be part of history. Now, one interesting thing that happened was Ole Miss beat the absolute brakes off of High Point yesterday. I think whenever that ended, 23 runs or something like that. It was impressive. It was a Jekyll and Hyde weekend. Now, let's go back with this Ole Miss baseball program just a few weeks, okay? Or just a week. I am against that Hawaii trip for so many ways. And I know that the residuals of that Hawaii trip have probably now blown over a little bit. They've kind of getting back to normal, and coming up in a week, they got 105 coming to the pitcher's mound. They have to be ready to go. But Ole Miss dropped the first game against High Point and did not look particularly good doing it. That is like 3 days or 2 days after losing to Arkansas State at home. Ole Miss has dropped 4 non-conference games in the course of the first 2 weekends of the season. That's not good. Don't even try and spin that in any way. It's at a point where if you want to make a regional and get where you need to be, you can only afford to lose like 4 more non-conference games over the course of the regular season. That's going to be non-conference games that include Mississippi State, USM, Memphis. Those normal standby games are going to be on the schedule. So I say that to say this. I am not saying that Ole Miss has gotten right and all is well, okay? I'm not. They've dug themselves a pretty good hole. But I will say this. If Ole Miss can continue to pitch the baseball, pitch the football, use the force, Harry, right? Yeah, okay. If they can continue to pitch like they did the last 2 games of the season, or of this season against High Point, and not like they did against Arkansas State and against the first game and against High Point, and the bats are as alive as they've been, and everybody's going to talk about hit numbers, and I saw that in my Twitter thread all the time. It's like, well, they didn't have that many hits. They just hit some home runs. Well, they hit a lot of home runs. You can't take the home runs away. You can't. You're either a gap team, you're a home run team. You are looking for your identity as a hitter, and Ole Miss is finding it as a long ball team. Now, Will Furnace needs to be in the lineup every single game. Every game. In my opinion, every time I watch him, he is one of the best hitters that Ole Miss has. He helps the whole offense being in that lineup. Trayson Hughes hasn't really started hit it yet. He is a guy that is probably Ole Miss's highest rated transfer. So there's an elevation of what this team can do. Jackson Ross, I think he hit 4 bombs over the course of the weekend. He's probably an SEC Player of the Week candidate. And if you're looking at pitching, Dennis, Saunier pitched fine. They did what they needed to do to get the win. And Ole Miss doing like that, it's going to help them out. It's getting a little bit progressively better again with Iowa coming in to Swayze Field in the course of a weekend. And that's going to be 105 miles an hour coming in on the mound. He's going to throw it as hard as anybody can. And if you're not ready to hit it, you're not going to be able to hit it. So if we're going to worry about hitting the ball, let's find out if we can handle that velocity. Because here's kind of the real when it comes to High Point. There wasn't any velocity in that game. Those pitchers, while decent, they're kind of in the SEC in the category of being a soft tosser. How do you transition to the next level and get ready? Because after Iowa, I think is SEC play, if I'm not mistaken. And we all know that SEC play is no joke. And this hole that Ole Miss baseball has dug for themselves with SEC play starting is going to be that much harder for Ole Miss to turn all of this around, to get into the tournament, because that is the goal. And I've told people on this show and in other shows on this channel, until it is readily apparent that Ole Miss is going to have trouble making it into the tournament, I'm not going to freak out about it. I'm not going to overly freak out about anything, because that's the important thing that everybody needs to keep their eye on in the future, is making that tournament. And you do that by winning games like this against High Point. Should have won that first game. This should have been a 3-game sweep. There's no getting around it. Probably should have won another game in Hawaii, and you shouldn't have let Arkansas State beat you. At most, you should have 2 losses now? At most. But you don't. You have 4. And with 4 losses, Ole Miss is now, 4-4? You got to claw out of it. You got to scratch out of it. And the confidence of the players, you were able to see it in the game Sunday against High Point. You could just tell by the way they were moving around. They thought they were going to hit the ball, and they thought they were going to hit it hard. They weren't just hoping to. And that's a good sign, because all things in team sports is about confidence. If there's no confidence, you're in trouble. If there's all the confidence, you can beat anybody. That is the way this works. So it should be really interesting indeed. Anyway, thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen. Everydayers, we have Keith Carter slated for this weekend, and we're also waiting on the most anticipated football season at Ole Miss, maybe ever. And you can hear about it all right here. But for your second listen, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every single league. For our second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 stream channel. For those of you on YouTube, we'll send you there right now. Tigers and Astros, I'm going there today. I hope everybody has a good Monday. I'll be back for tomorrow's show and Dalen Flowers tonight. We'll see you then. Anyway, hotty toddy, everyone.